There's a version of you that only exists after everything falls apart. You haven't met that version yet. Maybe you have, and you don't even recognize how different you've become. Because something strange happens to human beings when they lose everything. When the job is gone, when the relationship ends, when the money runs out, when the identity you built your entire life around suddenly collapses in on itself. Something breaks, but something else, something nobody warns you about, quietly begins. Almost everyone who has truly hit rock bottom will tell you the same strange thing. It wasn't the best moment of their life, but somehow, looking back, it was the moment their real life actually started. If you've ever been there, completely broken, completely lost, lying awake at 3 and wondering how you got here, wondering if you'll ever feel okay again, I need you to keep watching, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand something about that version of yourself that you probably never understood while you were living through it. And if you haven't hit rock bottom yet, watch anyway. Because statistically, almost everyone does, eventually. And what you're about to learn might be the difference between rock bottom breaking you, or rock bottom becoming the exact moment you finally became who you were supposed to be. There's a specific psychological reason why rock bottom changes people more than any self-help book, any motivational speech, any New Year's resolution ever could. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why the worst moment of someone's life so often becomes the turning point of it. Stay until the end, because I'm going to explain the one specific mental shift that separates the people who get destroyed by rock bottom from the people who use it to rebuild into someone unrecognizable. And it's not what you think. Let's start with a question most people never actually stop to ask. Why does it take losing everything for people to finally change? Think about how humans normally operate. We know we should eat better, but we don't, until the doctor delivers a diagnosis that terrifies us. We know the relationship isn't working, but we stay, until something happens that makes staying impossible. We know we're unhappy in the job, in the city, in the life we're living, but we don't leave until we're forced out, laid off, pushed to the edge. Why does it take a crisis? Why can't we just decide to change, calmly, rationally, before everything falls apart? The answer lies in a concept psychologists call the status quo bias, a deeply wired preference for things to stay exactly as they are, even when things are bad, simply because as they are is known, and known feels safer than unknown, even when known is quietly destroying you. Your brain isn't built to optimize your happiness. It's built to keep you alive using the least amount of risk possible. And change, any change, registers as risk. So as long as your current life is survivable, even if it's miserable, even if it's slowly crushing your spirit, your brain will often choose to endure familiar pain over risking unfamiliar uncertainty. This is why people stay in jobs that drain them for years. This is why people stay in relationships that hurt them, sometimes for decades. This is why people know exactly what needs to change and still don't change it, sometimes for their entire lives. Rock bottom breaks this pattern in a way almost nothing else can, because rock bottom removes the option of staying the same. When the job is gone, you can't keep showing up to it. When the relationship ends, you can't keep pretending it's fine. When everything collapses, the safe, known, familiar path that your brain has been clinging to simply no longer exists. There's nothing left to protect. And for the first time, maybe in years, maybe in your entire life, the fear of change becomes smaller than the pain of staying exactly where you are, because staying is no longer even an option. This is the first secret of rock bottom. It doesn't create the need for change. The need for change was already there, sometimes for years. Rock bottom simply removes every excuse you had for avoiding it. But here's where it gets deeper, because losing everything doesn't just remove your excuses. It does something even more profound. It removes your identity. Think about how much of who you believe you are is actually built on things outside of you. Your job title, your relationship status, your bank account, your reputation, the way certain people see you, your role in your family, your social circle, your daily routine. Most people, without ever consciously realizing it, build their entire sense of self on a foundation made of things that can be taken away. And when rock bottom hits, when the job disappears, when the marriage ends, when the money runs out, when the friend group scatters, it doesn't just take away external circumstances. It takes away the mirror you've been using to know who you are. This is why rock bottom feels less like sadness and more like disappearing. People describe it in eerily similar language, no matter what caused it. I didn't know who I was anymore. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person looking back. This isn't dramatic exaggeration. This is a real psychological phenomenon called identity foreclosure collapse. When the external structures a person used to define themselves are suddenly gone, and what's left is something raw, unfamiliar, and terrifyingly undefined. And here is the part that changes everything, the part almost nobody explains properly. That terrifying, empty, undefined space, the one that feels like the worst thing that's ever happened to you, is also the only space large enough to build a completely new identity inside of. As long as your old identity was intact, there was no room for a new one. You can't build a new house on land that's already occupied. Rock bottom, as brutal as it is, clears the land. It's devastating. It's disorienting. But for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, there's actually space to become someone different. Not because you chose to tear down the old identity, but because it's already gone, whether you wanted it to be or not. This is why so many people, after their lowest moment, describe becoming almost unrecognizable to the people who knew them before. Not because rock bottom is magical, but because rock bottom did something that decades of comfortable living never could. It cleared the space. Now let's talk about what actually happens inside the brain during this period, because this is where the science gets genuinely fascinating. When someone experiences a crisis severe enough to be called rock bottom, the brain enters a state that researchers sometimes describe as a neurological reset window. High stress, high emotion events trigger a flood of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, but they also trigger something less talked about: heightened neuroplasticity. Your brain, in the aftermath of intense emotional upheaval, becomes unusually flexible, unusually capable of forming new patterns, new associations, new habits. This is partly why people who go through severe crises, addiction rock bottoms, divorce, bankruptcy, health scares, so often describe a strange clarity afterward. Not immediately. Immediately, there's usually just pain, confusion, grief. But once the initial shock settles, many people report a kind of sharpened awareness they've never experienced before. Priorities become obvious in a way they never were. Things that used to feel important suddenly feel irrelevant. Things that used to feel impossible suddenly feel urgent and necessary. This clarity isn't random. It's your brain, freed from the grooves of old habitual thinking, briefly capable of seeing your life without the filters you'd been using for years. Filters built from fear, from comfort, from other people's expectations, from the identity that just collapsed. For a short window, none of those filters are fully back in place yet. And in that window, some people make the most important decisions of their entire lives. But, and this is critical, this window doesn't stay open forever. This is exactly where the path splits into two completely different outcomes. And understanding this split might be the single most important thing in this entire video. Some people during this reset window use the clarity to rebuild. They make different choices. They walk away from what wasn't working. They build new habits while the old identity's grip is loosened. They use the pain as fuel, and by the time the window closes, they've already constructed a new foundation strong enough to hold the person they're becoming. Other people during this same window do something completely different. They panic. And in the panic, they rush to rebuild the exact same life they just lost, the same type of relationship, the same unhealthy coping mechanisms, the same career pattern, the same avoidance. Because rebuilding something familiar, even if it's the very thing that led to the collapse, feels safer than sitting inside the unfamiliar long enough to build something new. This is why some people hit rock bottom and transform completely, and other people hit rock bottom and hit it again and again, cycling through the same collapse in slightly different forms, year after year, never understanding why the pattern keeps repeating. The difference between these two outcomes isn't intelligence. It isn't even resilience, not in the way most people think about resilience. The difference is what someone does with the discomfort of not knowing who they are yet. Let's go deeper into this, because this is the part that most people misunderstand. And misunderstanding it is exactly why so many people rebuild the same broken life instead of a new one. After identity collapse, there's an unbearable urge to fill the emptiness immediately. Silence, uncertainty, not knowing who you are or what your life is going to look like. This is one of the most psychologically uncomfortable states a human being can experience. And discomfort, left unmanaged, demands relief. So people reach for the fastest available relief, which is almost always familiar relief. The same type of partner, the same coping mechanism, the same identity, just wearing a different outfit. This is why so many people, after a painful divorce, end up in a strikingly similar relationship within a year. Not because they didn't learn anything, but because they couldn't tolerate the emptiness long enough to build something genuinely different. So they filled it with the fastest familiar shape available. This is why people who lose everything to addiction sometimes get sober, only to become addicted to something else entirely. Work, control, a new relationship, anything that provides the same numbing relief the old addiction used to provide. The people who transform completely after rock bottom are not the people who avoid this emptiness. They're the people who tolerate it, who sit inside the discomfort of not knowing who they are, for weeks, sometimes months, sometimes longer, resisting the urge to fill it with the first familiar thing that shows up. This tolerance is uncomfortable in a way that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't experienced it. It feels like free falling with no ground in sight. But it's inside that free fall, uncomfortable as it is, that real transformation actually happens. Because you can't build a new identity while you're frantically trying to reconstruct the old one. Now here's something that explains one of the strangest, most consistent patterns among people who transform after rock bottom. The sudden, almost radical shift in what they value. Before rock bottom, most people's values are inherited, absorbed, borrowed from parents, from culture, from what looked successful to the people around them. You wanted the job because it looked impressive. You stayed in the relationship because leaving felt like failure. You chased the version of success that everyone around you seemed to be chasing, without ever really asking whether it was your version or someone else's. Rock bottom, brutally and without permission, strips all of that away. And in the emptiness that follows, something remarkable happens. For the first time, a person is forced to ask, often for the first time in their entire life, what do I actually want, now that everything I thought I wanted is gone? This question is terrifying because it has no easy answer, but it's also the most honest question most people ever ask themselves. And the answers that come out of rock bottom tend to be radically different from the answers that existed before it. People leave careers they spent a decade building, not because rock bottom made them fail, but because rock bottom finally gave them permission to admit they never actually wanted that career in the first place. People rebuild relationships with family members they distanced themselves from. People start businesses, move countries, change everything, not out of impulsiveness, but because for the first time, they're building a life based on values they actually chose, instead of values they simply inherited and never questioned. This is why people who transform after rock bottom often seem, to everyone who knew them before, like a completely different person. Because in a very real sense, they are. Not a broken version of who they used to be. A version built from the ground up, based on choices that are finally, actually theirs. Now, let's talk about the part almost nobody discusses honestly, The part that happens after the transformation, once the dust has settled and the new life has started to take shape. Because here's something surprising. The people who rebuild themselves after rock bottom don't describe their new life as free from struggle. What they describe, almost universally, is a different relationship with struggle itself. Before rock bottom, difficulty felt like evidence that something was wrong, a signal to panic, to avoid, to escape. After rebuilding from rock bottom, difficulty starts to feel like something else entirely. Familiar, survivable, even in a strange way, less frightening, because they've already survived the worst version of difficulty that exists. Everything after that has a kind of ceiling on how bad it can actually get. This is one of the quiet gifts hidden inside rock bottom that almost nobody talks about, because it sounds strange to call anything about rock bottom a gift. But people who have truly been through it and truly rebuilt will tell you a kind of fear leaves you permanently once you've survived losing everything. Not all fear, but the specific fear of what if it all falls apart, loses most of its power once you've already lived through it all falling apart and discovered, against everything you believed at the time, that you were still there afterward. Different, changed, but there. So if you're in it right now, if you're in the middle of your own version of rock bottom, if everything you built has collapsed, if you don't recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror, if you have no idea who you are without the job, the relationship, the identity that just disappeared, I need you to understand something. You are not broken. You are cleared. There's a difference. What you're feeling right now, this unbearable emptiness, isn't the end of your story. It's the blank space every single transformed person has had to sit inside before they built something real. The discomfort you're feeling isn't a sign that something has gone wrong. It's a sign that the old structure is finally gone. And for the first time in a long time, there's actually room to build something that's truly, finally, yours. Don't rush to fill the emptiness with the nearest familiar thing. Don't panic rebuild the same life just because uncertainty feels unbearable. Sit inside it a little longer than feels comfortable. Ask the question almost nobody asks until they have no other choice. What do I actually want, now that everything I thought I wanted is gone? The answer that comes from that question, uncomfortable as it is to sit with, is usually the truest answer you'll ever get from yourself. Because the people who come back from rock bottom completely different, the people everyone else describes as unrecognizable, transformed, like they became a whole new person. They didn't find some secret the rest of us don't have access to. They simply survived long enough inside the discomfort of not knowing to finally build something real. If this video helped you understand your own rock bottom, past or present, a little differently, make sure you're subscribed to Psychologic Mindset, because every week we go deep into the psychology of the moments that shape who we really are, the patterns underneath our pain that almost nobody ever properly explains. Let me know in the comments, have you ever hit a rock bottom that ended up changing your entire life? I read every single comment, and I would genuinely like to know your story. Thank you for staying until the very end. That says something about you. It means whatever you're going through right now, you're still here, still watching, still trying to understand yourself a little better. That alone tells me you're going to be okay. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.